Hello friend, I want to tell you about the Volkswagen Touareg car. The Volkswagen Touareg is the first fully fledged SUV of the German brand. Today, it is already a car that is over 10 years old. This is a car that at one time was the most luxurious model of the brand, next to the not very popular Phaeton, and at the same time one of the few Volkswagens in the premium segment that could compete with Mercedes or BMW, and ultimately turned out to be a technically better design. It also gave rise to the Porsche Cayenne and allowed Volkswagen customers to move freely off-road. Thanks to its rigid structure, four-wheel drive, reduction gear and pneumatic suspension, it allowed driving off-road in areas that only the competing Range Rover or Jeep Grand Cherokee could handle. On the other hand, cars such as the BMW X5, Mercedes ML or Volvo XC90 did not even think of venturing where the Touareg had not yet struggled. When it comes to the history of the model, an important date is 2007, when the facelift took place, during which new FSI petrol engines were introduced, 3.6 and 4.2. In 2010, the second-generation Touareg appeared. The car was built based on the standards prevailing in this class. The self-supporting body was equipped with an independent multi-link suspension, based on solid subframes. Four-wheel drive was provided by a transfer reduction gearbox with a differential mechanism controlled by a plate lock that allowed for permanent locking, and an optional rear differential lock was also available. Thanks to advanced electronics, the drive can transfer up to 100% of the torque to one of the axles. An option was also air suspension, which can raise the Touareg to a height of 300 mm from the ground or lower it to a ground clearance of 160 mm. The driver can count not only on good construction, but also on the aforementioned electronics supporting off-road driving. Engines. The Volkswagen Touareg had a lot of engines, mostly large for the brand. Let's start with petrol, and here we have at least V6. The range started with a 3.2-liter unit with 220 hydrogen phosphide, which was later replaced by a 3.6 FSI engine with 280 HP. Larger engines were 4.2-liter V8 and later 4.2 FSI. They generated 310 and 350 HP respectively. The Royal unit is the 6.0 W12 engine with 450 HP. Diesels offer a similar range of capacities as petrols. The basic engine was a fairly simple design, the 2.5 TDI-R5 generating 174 HP. Contrary to appearances, this engine was successful since it was offered until 2009. However, from 2004, customers could choose a more powerful 3.0 TDI V6 engine with 225 hydrogen phosphide, and later 240 HP. For the picky, there was also a top diesel 5.0 V10 generating 313 HP and 750 Nm, and in some versions it was possible to obtain parameters of 350 HP and 850 Nm, respectively. It is worth adding here that the 2.5 and 5.0 TDI engines are constructions based on the same solutions. They were powered by pump injectors, while the 3.0 TDI is already a technology with common rail injection. What's broken? Let's start with which engine is best to choose and which to skip and why. It's like the old saying goes, the simpler the better, so the optimal choice in terms of operating costs seems to be the 3.2 V6 petrol and the 2.5 TDI-R5 diesel. The first will be greedy for fuel, but it's a relatively simple design that doesn't have any major shortcomings. Sometimes you may have a problem with uneven operation, which is caused by one of the sensors or burnt spark plugs. In general, this is a solid engine, because it is not equipped with turbocharging and direct injection, which its successor is equipped with. Interestingly, people using the newer 3.6 FSI do not complain much either, although of course the problem with carbon deposits is known to them. The 2.5 TDI engine is a bit different. This unit has nothing in common with the disastrous 2.5 TDI V6 known from Volkswagen and Audi passenger cars, but it is a solid machine, prepared for work in difficult conditions, powering Volkswagen delivery models. The engine still has unit injectors, but in terms of overall durability it deserves recognition. Of course, there can always be a problem with EGR or turbocharger, as well as with the unit injectors themselves, but that can be expected even with much better designs. Overall, it's a simple, not very powerful tractor that can be repaired relatively cheaply, even if a major failure occurs. Unfortunately, the only unrepairable problem is seizure, and there are known cases of this type of damage. The reason? Of course, long mileages between oil changes. An interesting fact is that the timing drive is realized by gears, so theoretically not only its wear, but also skipping on the teeth is impossible. In practice, it varies, and some engines already make a lot of noise in the area of the timing drive. Unfortunately, the 2.5 TDI engine has one drawback: lack of power. It does generate a solid portion of Newton meters, as much as 400, but it is still too little for dynamic driving in a large and heavy car. In addition, it lacks a bit of bottom end, but as a drive for an off-road vehicle it is good. Moving up a class, we come to the V8 petrol and V6 diesel engines. The 4.2-liter unit is a good option for those looking for dynamics above all, and who are not particularly concerned about fuel consumption. Contrary to appearances, the V8 engine is not particularly demanding in terms of service and does not ruin the budget as long as everything is in order. That is why it is worth taking care of it and not saving on consumables. The 310 HP V8 engine is a design within direct injection, so just like the basic V6 it is suitable for the installation of a gas system, but you have to remember that it has to be a decent set. The newer 4.2-liter FSI engine with 350 HP now has direct injection. It is worth noting that this is a good engine, but it can use larger amounts of oil, carbon deposits appear and the electronics sometimes fail, but it is generally good. Theoretically, the best choice is the 3.0 TDI V6 engine. It is a state-of-the-art design that provides everything you need: low fuel consumption, decent durability, bearable operating costs and good dynamics. Depending on the year, the engine generated a modest 225 or 240 hydrogen phosphide, but a solid 500 to 550 Newton meters. Unfortunately, when buying a Touareg with this engine, you should be careful, because any repairs will be quite expensive. The 6.0 W12 and 5.0 TDI V10 engines stand at the pedestal of the Volkswagen Touareg engine offer. The first is a petrol engine, about which it is difficult to say anything except that it is extremely rare and its operation itself will be expensive, and it is better not to think about breakdowns. On the other hand, the diesel V10, which is also not very common in advertisements, already seems like a tempting offer. It is not much more expensive, and sometimes cheaper, than the TDI V6 versions, and offers parameters that you can fall in love with. However, I will cool your enthusiasm right away: it may be a bottomless pit. Even Volkswagen employees themselves say so. The problem with the engine is not even that it is particularly prone to failures, but that it often requires very large financial outlays to do anything to it. First, it is tightly packed in the engine compartment, so many repairs, including replacing the timing belt, require its removal. There would be nothing terrible about it if it weren't for the fact that removing the V10 is a bit more laborious than removing the V6. The second thing is the large number of cylinders. Replacing the glow plugs alone can make your head spin, because what if 3 of the plugs are seized and break off while trying to unscrew them? There can be more situations like that. For example, a problem with injectors. Imagine that 2 unit injectors are failing. How does this affect the operation of a 10-cylinder engine? You will not feel a drop in power or a drop in work culture. However, there is no need to talk about the consequences of driving for a longer period of time with leaking injectors and how expensive it will be to replace all of them, even if they were cheap. Despite the above, the 5.0 V10 TDI engine can be recommended, but only to people who are aware and buy a car that is absolutely well maintained, well groomed and regularly serviced in a good workshop. All faults, even the smallest ones, should be removed on an ongoing basis. And one more thing, it is best to be a mechanic yourself, and a good one at that. That's all about the engines. They were offered with manual, weaker versions, and automatic, weaker and stronger, gearboxes. Both designs shouldn't cause any major problems, but in both cases it's worth bearing in mind that they aren't indestructible, so torturing them off-road will be harmful to them. Especially for an automatic flooded with water. Fortunately, you don't have to worry about the drivetrain, which is refined and durable. However, it is worth remembering to change the gear oil in the axles. Among the things that can increase operating costs, the optional air suspension should be mentioned. As long as it is functional, it usually only pleases the owner. Sometimes the electronics, a sensor, fail, but these are usually minor issues. Similarly, valve leaks, which, however, require quick repair. Unfortunately, many people drive with such failures for a long time, which results in increasing problems and expenses later. Ultimately, when it comes to the need to replace the bellows, the expenses count in the thousands. Electronics is something that is not lacking in the Touareg, and therefore it is an area where failures should be expected. Errors, a large number of sensors, occur relatively often, resulting not so much from failures as from lack of connections in the installation. It is best to remove tire pressure sensors from the car right away. It is worth having a mechanic friend with a diagnostic computer, because you can lose your nerves if you have to pay for the diagnosis every time a message lights up. It is also good to have an honest mechanic, because anyone can replace a sensor, but fixing the connections on the wires is a higher school of driving. It is worth remembering this ironic remark when choosing a workshop to take your car to. It is mainly due to poor service that this type of car turns out to be expensive to operate. Let's get back to the subject of suspension. In this case, Touareg is not the same as Touareg. The suspension will react differently to the 2.5 TDI engine under the hood, and differently to the heavy V10. It is mainly the versions with large engines that require replacement of shock absorbers, wishbones, links or brakes more often. Lighter versions are in this case more pleasant for the owner's budget. There is no major problem with the availability of spare parts for the Volkswagen Touareg, although not all of them will always be available immediately in every wholesaler. The good news is that many consumables can be purchased inexpensively. However, that is not the problem. The bigger issue is maintaining the car in good condition, and a car that does not require any current repairs should be considered such. The rule is simple. You should repair everything on a current basis and not leave yourself any slack in terms of servicing. Each problem left will translate into another. Instead of spending $250 at the service right away, if you postpone the expense over time, you can expect the cost to be 2 or 3 times higher. The second rule is that the more cylinders, the higher the operating costs. And this does not only apply to the engine, but also to the electrical system or suspension. However, even if we stick to the engine, the 2.5 TDI and 5.0 TDI designs are twins, or rather the larger engine is two 2.5 TDI twins. Many of the accessories are interchangeable, but the number of cylinders and the size of the engine, capacity of the lubrication and cooling systems, quickly increase the basic service costs. A lot also depends on how the car is used. For short distances, choose petrol engines. For long distances, diesels are best. For off-road driving, good units are petrol V6 or R5 TDI. Large engines are best left for the motorway. It is also worth remembering that, despite the appearances this car makes off-road, it is not an off-road vehicle and it is not that easy to repair. Its suspension will not withstand such a blow as a rigid axle, and, for example, a drive shaft costs a fortune. It also has no frame, so removing the bodywork is probably out of the question. Only in the case of the 2.5 TDI and 3.0 TDI engines can you count on relatively low fuel consumption, at around 8 to 12 L, 100 km. As for petrol engines, regardless of size, and depending on the driver's temperament, these will be values of 15 to 25 L, 100 km. Similar fuel consumption will also appear in the 5-liter diesel. There is no point in even talking about the W12. The situation in simpler petrol engines is saved by installing an LPG system. It depends on whether you are looking for an SUV or just a car. If we look at the close competition, the Volkswagen Touareg should be cheaper to run than the Range Rover or Porsche Cayenne, cheaper to repair than the Volvo XC90 and BMW X3, in better technical condition than the Mercedes ML, and more comfortable than the Jeep Grand Cherokee Week. On the other hand, it certainly won't be as capable off-road as an American or British classic. It will drive worse on black than a BMW, and it certainly won't be as reliable as a Volvo. So it has its advantages and disadvantages compared to the competition, and you can't ignore it when choosing a used SUV of the upper class. When asked if it's worth it, I answer, generally yes, but it depends on what engine. Thanks for listening to me. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and rate my video. If you know of any problems with this car that I haven't mentioned, be sure to write about them in the comments.
I have good news for you. Now, if you are planning to buy a used car, or learn more about your car, you no longer need to search for the information you need on the internet. We have collected everything in one place for you, on the website carme.pro. Here you can find out everything about the car, what breaks and at what mileage, any problems with engines, chassis or gearboxes, which trim levels are better not to mess with, and how not to lose money buying a used car. You will learn all this on carme.pro.